The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her tactical vest for the 100th time. Sweat had already begun to form on her forehead despite the early hour. Around her, the sounds of preparation filled the air, equipment being checked, weapons being cleaned, and the low murmur of conversations between team members who had trained together for years. Sarah was different from the others gathered at the elite military training facility. While most of the Navy SEALs around her were men who had served in recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, Sarah carried herself with a quiet confidence that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent age. At 35, she had laugh lines around her eyes and a way of moving that suggested she had seen more than most people twice her age. The training exercise was designed to test the limits of even the most experienced Special Forces operators. Teams from different branches of the military had been brought together for a joint operation simulation that would push everyone to their breaking point. The scenario involved a hostage rescue mission in hostile territory, complete with live ammunition exercises, psychological pressure tests, and survival challenges that would separate the truly elite from the merely skilled. As Sarah checked her gear one final time, she noticed the sideways glances from some of the other participants. Being one of only 3 women in a group of 40 elite soldiers was nothing new to her. She had grown accustomed to proving herself over and over again, not because she sought attention, but because excellence was simply who she was. The commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, gathered everyone around a large tactical map spread across several tables. His voice carried the authority of someone who had seen combat in multiple theaters and earned the respect of every person under his command. The mission briefing was detailed and complex, involving multiple entry points, coordinated timing, and the kind of split-second decision-making that could mean the difference between life and death in real operations. During the briefing, Sarah found herself grouped with Team Alpha, led by Master Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, a decorated SEAL with 3 tours in Afghanistan under his belt. Rodriguez had the kind of reputation that preceded him wherever he went. Stories of his heroics were legendary within the special operations community, and his team members looked at him with the kind of respect reserved for true warriors. As the teams began to form and establish their hierarchy, conversations naturally turned to combat experience. This was standard procedure in military circles. Understanding each team member's background was crucial for effective coordination. Rodriguez began asking each team member about their service record, deployment history, and specialized skills. When he got to David Thompson, a younger SEAL, the conversation became animated as Thompson described his experiences in Fallujah. His stories were vivid and intense, filled with the kind of details that only someone who had been there could provide. The team listened with the focused attention that combat veterans gave to accounts of real warfare. Next was Marcus Williams, whose deployment to Kandahar had earned him a Bronze Star for valor. His quiet recounting of a night raid that saved an entire village from Taliban forces held the group spellbound. The respect in the air was palpable as each man's service was acknowledged and honored by his peers. As the circle moved around, each team member shared their combat history with the kind of understated pride that marked true professionals. There were stories from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and various classified operations that couldn't be discussed in detail, but were acknowledged with knowing nods from those who understood the weight of such service. When the attention finally turned to Sarah, the atmosphere shifted slightly. It wasn't openly hostile, but there was a certain expectation in the air. Master Chief Rodriguez looked at her with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. He had served alongside capable women before and had learned not to make assumptions based on gender alone. Martinez, Rodriguez said, his tone professional but friendly. What's your background? Where did you see action? The question hung in the air like a challenge, though Rodriguez hadn't intended it that way. Around them, other team members continued their preparations, but Sarah could sense that several pairs of ears were tuned to the conversation. This was the moment that often defined how she would be perceived by a new group of colleagues. Sarah paused in her equipment check and looked up at Rodriguez with eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience that didn't quite match her youthful appearance. There was something in her expression that suggested the question was more complicated than it might seem on the surface. "That's an interesting question, Master Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady and calm. Which war are you referring to? The simplicity of her response caught Rodriguez off guard. Most people, when asked about their combat experience, would launch into detailed accounts of their deployments. Sarah's question suggested something different entirely, as if she had so much combat experience that she needed clarification about which conflict he wanted to hear about. Rodriguez assumed she was being evasive or perhaps trying to deflect because she lacked the combat experience of her male counterparts. This wasn't uncommon among soldiers who had served in support roles or had been deployed to relatively quiet sectors. He decided to be more specific. I mean recent deployments, Rodriguez clarified with a slight smile. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. The usual suspects for our generation. The other team members had begun to pay more attention to the conversation now. There was something in Sarah's demeanor that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical exchange of war stories. She continued working on her equipment as she spoke, her hands moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of years of repetition. Master Chief, Sarah said thoughtfully, I need you to be more specific than that. Are you asking about Desert Storm, where I served as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne? Or perhaps you're interested in my time in Somalia during Operation Restore Hope, where I was part of a special operations team providing medical support during some of the heaviest fighting Mogadishu saw? Rodriguez stopped what he was doing and looked at her more carefully. The timeline she was suggesting didn't quite add up with her apparent age, but her tone was matter-of-fact rather than boastful. There was no hint of fabrication in her voice, just the weary recognition of someone who had seen more than their fair share of conflict. Maybe you want to know about Bosnia, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, as if she were remembering things she would rather forget. I was there during the worst of the ethnic cleansing, working with NATO forces trying to establish safe zones for civilians. Or perhaps you're curious about my time in Kosovo, where I learned that sometimes the hardest part of being a soldier isn't facing the enemy. It's trying to protect innocent people when politics get in the way. The conversation around them had begun to quiet as other team members started to overhear Sarah's response. What had begun as a routine exchange of credentials was turning into something much more significant. Rodriguez found himself reevaluating his assumptions about the woman standing before him. There was also Sierra Leone, Sarah continued, her hands never stopping their methodical preparation of her gear. Not many Americans know about that one, but I was there with a small team providing humanitarian aid during the Civil War. Then there was East Timor, where I served as part of the international peacekeeping force during their struggle for independence. By now, the entire team had stopped their preparations to listen. Sarah's matter-of-fact recitation of conflicts spanning more than 2 decades painted a picture of a career that most soldiers could only dream of, or perhaps have nightmares about. Rodriguez realized that he had stumbled into something much deeper than a simple question about combat experience. The woman before him wasn't just a skilled soldier. She was a living repository of modern military history, someone who had been present at many of the most significant conflicts of the past 25 years. And, yes, Sarah said, finally, looking up from her equipment to meet Rodriguez's gaze directly. I did serve in Iraq and Afghanistan too. Multiple tours in both countries, actually. Iraq from 2003 to 2005, then, again in 2007 during the surge. Afghanistan from 2009 to 2011, and then a final deployment there in 2014. The silence that followed was profound. Every person within earshot was trying to process the implications of what they had just heard. If Sarah was telling the truth, and her detailed, emotionless recitation suggested she was, then she had more combat experience than any of them, possibly more than all of them combined. Rodriguez felt a mixture of embarrassment and respect washing over him. His casual question about her service record had revealed that he was in the presence of someone whose experience dwarfed his own. The realization was humbling and somewhat overwhelming. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a new level of respect. I think I need to apologize for my assumption about your experience level. Sarah shook her head with a slight smile that held no malice, only understanding. No apology necessary, Master Chief. You asked a fair question. I just wanted to make sure I gave you the answer you were looking for. As the weight of Sarah's revelation settled over the group, the dynamics of Team Alpha began to shift in subtle but significant ways. The casual assumptions about hierarchy based on gender and apparent age were replaced by a growing awareness that they were in the presence of someone whose experience transcended the usual metrics by which soldiers measured each other. The training exercise was about to begin, but, for Team Alpha, the real education had already started. They were about to learn what it meant to serve alongside someone who had spent more than 2 decades answering her country's call in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The training compound fell eerily quiet as Sarah's words hung in the air like smoke after a battle. Master Chief Rodriguez found himself staring at this woman who had just casually recounted a military career that spanned conflicts most people only read about in history books. Around them, the other members of Team Alpha had stopped their preparations entirely, their attention completely focused on the conversation that had taken an unexpected turn. David Thompson, the young SEAL who had been so animated about his experiences in Fallujah just minutes earlier, now felt his own combat stories shrinking in significance. His single deployment, which had seemed so important and defining just moments ago, suddenly felt like a footnote compared to Sarah's extensive service record. Marcus Williams, whose Bronze Star had been a source of quiet pride, found himself looking at Sarah with new eyes. The calm, methodical way she had listed conflict after conflict suggested someone who had long ago moved beyond the need to prove herself to anyone. Her tone had been neither boastful nor apologetic, simply factual, as if she were reading from a personnel file rather than recounting her own life experiences. Rodriguez struggled to reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. Sarah appeared to be in her mid-30s, which meant she would have had to begin her military career as a teenager to have participated in all the conflicts she had mentioned. Yet there was something in her bearing, in the way she moved and spoke, that suggested every word was true. "Martinez," Rodriguez said carefully, "if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been serving?" Sarah paused in her equipment check and looked up with eyes that seemed older than her face suggested. "I enlisted when I was 17, Master Chief. That was in 1991, just before the Gulf War. My parents had to sign a waiver because I was still a minor." The mathematics of her statement hit the group like a physical blow. If Sarah had enlisted in 1991 at 17, that would make her 48 years old now, not the mid-30s she appeared to be. It would also mean she had been serving for over 30 years, participating in virtually every major American military action of the past 3 decades. Thompson couldn't help but speak up, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Ma'am, you've been serving since before I was born." Sarah smiled at that, an expression that was both sad and understanding. "I've been serving since before most of you were born, son. When I was in Somalia, some of you were still in elementary school. When I was in Bosnia, you were worrying about high school graduation." The revelation created a strange atmosphere within the team. These were all elite soldiers, men who had proven themselves in combat and earned the right to wear the SEAL trident. Yet suddenly, they found themselves feeling like rookies in the presence of someone whose experience made their own service seem brief by comparison. Rodriguez realized that he needed to adjust his entire approach to team leadership. He had assumed he would be the most experienced member of Team Alpha, the one to whom others would look for guidance based on his combat record and rank. Now he was faced with the reality that one of his team members had been in combat situations when he was still deciding what to do with his life after high school. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a more formal tone that reflected his growing respect. "What was your role in all these deployments? Were you always medical support?" Sarah's expression grew more serious as she considered how much to reveal about the classified aspects of her service. "I started as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne, that's true. But, over the years my role evolved. Advanced medical training, special operations support, intelligence gathering, training foreign military personnel, humanitarian mission coordination. When you serve as long as I have, you tend to accumulate a wide range of skills." What she didn't mention was the classified nature of many of her deployments, the times she had operated under deep cover in hostile territories, the missions that would never appear in any official record. The full scope of her service was something that would require security clearances most of the team didn't possess to fully understand. Williams, still processing the implications of serving alongside someone with such extensive experience, asked, "Ma'am, what's the most important thing you've learned in all that time?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands continuing their practiced movements as she prepared her gear. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "The most important thing I've learned," she said slowly, "is that every conflict teaches you something different about yourself and about humanity. In the Gulf War, I learned that modern warfare could be swift and decisive, but that the human cost is always higher than the politicians calculate. In Somalia, I learned that good intentions aren't enough if you don't understand the culture and politics of the place you're trying to help." She paused, checking the sight on her weapon with movements that spoke of decades of repetition. "In Bosnia and Kosovo, I learned that humans are capable of unspeakable cruelty to each other, but also incredible acts of courage and compassion. In Sierra Leone and East Timor, I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for people is simply bear witness to their suffering and help them tell their story to the world." The team listened with the kind of focused attention that soldiers reserve for lessons that might one day save their lives. This wasn't theoretical knowledge being shared. This was practical wisdom earned through decades of service in the most challenging environments imaginable. "In Iraq and Afghanistan," Sarah continued, "I learned that the line between victory and defeat isn't always clear, and that the most important battles are often fought in the hearts and minds of people, not just on the battlefield. I learned that cultural understanding can be more valuable than firepower, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show restraint when you have the power to act." Rodriguez found himself hanging on every word. These weren't the typical war stories that soldiers shared, tales of heroism and victory designed to impress or intimidate. These were the reflections of someone who had seen enough warfare to understand its complexity and ambiguity. Thompson, emboldened by Sarah's openness, asked, "What was the hardest deployment for you?" Sarah's hands stilled for the first time since the conversation had begun. When she looked up, there was a depth of sadness in her eyes that spoke of experiences that had left permanent marks on her soul. "Sierra Leone," she said quietly. 1999 to 2000. I was there with a small humanitarian team during the Civil War. We were trying to provide medical aid to civilians caught in the crossfire between the Revolutionary United Front and the government forces. She resumed working on her equipment, but her movements were slower now, more deliberate. "The things I saw there, children who had been forced to become soldiers, entire villages destroyed, families torn apart by violence that served no purpose except to maintain the power of warlords who cared nothing for the people they claimed to represent. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of shared understanding. Every member of the team had seen the aftermath of violence, but there was something in Sarah's tone that suggested she had witnessed horrors that went beyond typical combat experiences. "We lost 3 team members in Sierra Leone," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good people who died trying to help civilians who had no part in the conflict. That deployment taught me that sometimes the hardest part of being a soldier isn't surviving the fight. It's living with the knowledge that you couldn't save everyone who deserved to be saved." Williams felt a chill run down his spine. His own combat experiences, which had seemed so significant just an hour ago, suddenly felt limited and sanitized compared to what Sarah was describing. He realized that he had never truly considered what it would be like to serve in conflicts where the lines between combatants and civilians were blurred, where the mission was not to defeat an enemy, but to protect innocent people caught in circumstances beyond their control. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that having Sarah on his team was both an incredible asset and a significant responsibility. Her experience level meant she could provide insights and guidance that could prove invaluable during the training exercise. But it also meant that she had probably seen situations and made decisions that would be difficult for younger team members to fully comprehend. "Martinez," Rodriguez said carefully, "given your experience level, I think it would be appropriate for you to serve as my second-in-command for this exercise. Your knowledge and perspective could be invaluable for the team." Sarah looked at him with surprise. In her experience, team leadership was typically assigned based on rank and organizational hierarchy, not on combat experience. The fact that Rodriguez was willing to adjust the team structure based on her background spoke well of his leadership abilities and his commitment to mission success over personal ego. "Master Chief," Sarah replied, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm comfortable serving in whatever capacity best serves the team mission. I'm not here to take over anyone's command or prove anything to anyone. I'm here to do my job and help ensure everyone goes home safely at the end of the exercise. Her response only increased Rodriguez's respect for her. A soldier with her level of experience could easily have demanded recognition or special treatment, but Sarah was clearly more interested in team success than personal advancement. This attitude, combined with her extensive background, made her exactly the kind of team member every leader hoped to have. As the final preparations for the training exercise continued, the dynamic within Team Alpha had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a routine getting-to-know-you conversation had revealed that they had been joined by someone whose experience transcended anything they had imagined possible. The young SEALs who had been eager to share their own war stories now found themselves in the position of students rather than storytellers. They realized that they were about to participate in a training exercise alongside someone who had lived through more real combat situations than many soldiers experience in several lifetimes. For Sarah, the attention was both familiar and uncomfortable. She had spent decades proving herself in environments where her gender made her an anomaly, and her appearance often led to underestimation of her capabilities. But she had long ago learned that actions spoke louder than words, and she was confident that her performance during the exercise would speak for itself. As Colonel Harrison's voice echoed across the compound, calling all teams to their starting positions, Team Alpha began to move toward their assigned location. The training exercise was about to begin, and they would soon discover whether the theoretical respect Sarah had earned through her service record would translate into practical effectiveness in the field. The training exercise began with the sharp blast of an air horn that echoed across the sprawling military compound. Team Alpha moved out with the fluid precision that marked elite military units. But there was an underlying tension that hadn't existed an hour earlier. The revelation of Sarah's extensive combat experience had shifted everyone's understanding of team dynamics, and now they were about to see how theoretical respect would translate into practical cooperation under pressure. The first phase of the exercise was a reconnaissance mission requiring the team to infiltrate a mock enemy compound and gather intelligence without being detected. Rodriguez had assigned positions based on each team member's stated specialties, but he found himself unconsciously deferring to Sarah's experience in ways he hadn't anticipated. As they approached the perimeter of the target area, Sarah moved through the terrain with a fluidity that spoke of decades of practice. While the other team members were competent and well-trained, there was something different about the way she navigated the landscape, as if she had done this exact type of mission hundreds of times before, which, Rodriguez realized, she probably had. Thompson, who was serving as the team's primary scout, found himself naturally looking to Sarah for confirmation of his observations. What had started as professional respect was evolving into something deeper, a recognition that he was in the presence of someone who had refined her skills through experiences he could barely imagine. The mock enemy compound was defended by instructors playing the role of hostile forces, equipped with simulation weapons that would register hits on the electronic sensors each team member wore. The scenario was designed to test not just tactical skills, but decision-making under pressure, leadership capabilities, and team coordination. As Team Alpha established their observation post overlooking the target, Sarah's experience became immediately apparent. While the other team members focused on the obvious defensive positions and guard rotations, Sarah was reading the subtle signs that revealed the true nature of the compound's security. "Master Chief," she said quietly, her voice barely audible even to Rodriguez, who was lying next to her. "The guard rotation pattern is designed to look random, but there's a 17-minute gap in coverage of the northeast corner every hour. Also, the way the sentries are positioned suggests they're protecting something in the central building, not the perimeter structures." Rodriguez studied the compound through his binoculars, trying to see what Sarah had observed. To him, the defensive positions looked standard and well-coordinated. The fact that Sarah could identify patterns and vulnerabilities that escaped his notice was both impressive and slightly unsettling. "How can you tell?" Williams asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Sarah adjusted her position slightly to get a better view of the compound's layout. "After 30 years of doing this, you start to recognize certain patterns. The way guards move when they're following a script versus when they're genuinely alert. The difference between positions chosen for their tactical value versus positions chosen to look impressive during an exercise. She pointed to a seemingly innocuous guard tower. See how that sentry keeps checking his watch? That's not natural behavior for someone who's actually watching for threats. He's following a predetermined schedule. And notice how the guards near the central building are more alert than the ones on the perimeter? That tells you where the real objective is located. Thompson found himself frantically taking mental notes. This wasn't the kind of tactical analysis they taught in training. This was the accumulated wisdom of someone who had spent decades learning to read situations that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Rodriguez realized that he needed to adjust his approach to the mission. His original plan had been solid but conventional, exactly the kind of approach that instructors would expect from a well-trained team. Sarah's insights suggested opportunities for a more sophisticated strategy that could demonstrate superior tactical thinking. Martinez, Rodriguez said, what would you recommend for our approach? Sarah was quiet for several minutes, continuing to observe the compound with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was processing far more information than was immediately apparent. When she finally spoke, her tactical assessment was thorough and nuanced. The northeast approach during the guard rotation gap gives us access to the compound, but that's probably exactly what they expect most teams to identify. I'd recommend a more complex approach, a feint toward the obvious vulnerability while the real infiltration happens from the south, where the terrain is more difficult, but the defensive coverage is actually weaker. She traced her suggested route on the tactical map Rodriguez had spread between them. Thompson and Williams create a diversion near the northeast corner during the rotation gap. That draws attention and confirms the instructor's assumption that we've fallen for the obvious approach. Meanwhile, you and I infiltrate from the south, gather the actual intelligence, and extract before they realize the real mission happened elsewhere. Rodriguez studied her proposal carefully. It was significantly more complex than his original plan, requiring precise timing and coordination. But it also demonstrated the kind of sophisticated tactical thinking that would impress the instructors and provide valuable learning experiences for his team members. That's a risky approach, Rodriguez said. If the timing is off, we could end up with half the team captured and the mission failed. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the validity of his concern. You're absolutely right, Master Chief. In a real combat situation, I might recommend the safer approach. But this is a training exercise designed to test our capabilities and push our limits. Sometimes the best way to learn is to attempt something that requires you to operate at the edge of your abilities. Thompson had been listening to the exchange with growing excitement. The plan Sarah was proposing was exactly the kind of complex operation he had hoped to experience during the exercise, something that would challenge his skills and provide stories worth telling when he returned to his regular unit. Williams, however, was more cautious. His natural inclination was toward methodical, carefully planned operations that minimized risk and maximized the probability of success. Sarah's proposal felt like the kind of aggressive approach that could backfire spectacularly if anything went wrong. Ma'am, Williams said respectfully, what if they've anticipated that teams might try to outsmart the obvious approach? What if the real trap is in assuming the obvious vulnerability is a deception? Sarah smiled at that, an expression that held approval for Williams' tactical thinking. That's excellent analysis, Williams. You're thinking like someone who's planned defensive operations before. The answer is that we need to be prepared to adapt if our initial assessment proves incorrect. She pointed to several alternative routes on the map. That's why we maintain multiple exit strategies and communication protocols that allow us to abort the complex approach and fall back to something simpler if necessary. The key is having enough situational awareness to recognize when your plan isn't working and the flexibility to change course without losing the initiative. Rodriguez found himself impressed not just by Sarah's tactical knowledge, but by her ability to teach while planning. She was sharing insights that could prove valuable to his team members long after this exercise was over, helping them develop the kind of advanced tactical thinking that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. As the team prepared to implement Sarah's plan, Rodriguez noticed that the dynamic within the group had shifted again. The initial shock of learning about Sarah's experience had evolved into genuine respect for her expertise. Thompson and Williams were no longer thinking of her as an anomaly to be accommodated, but as a resource to be leveraged for mission success. The execution of the plan required precise timing and flawless communication. Thompson and Williams moved toward their assigned positions to create the diversion that would draw attention away from the real infiltration. Their movements were confident and professional, but Rodriguez could see the extra focus that came from knowing they were implementing a plan created by someone with decades of experience in similar operations. As Rodriguez and Sarah began their approach from the south, he found himself adjusting his own techniques to match her movements. She moved through the terrain with an economy of motion that he recognized as the mark of someone who had learned to conserve energy during long operations. Every step was deliberate and purposeful, designed to minimize noise and exposure while maintaining the ability to react quickly if the situation changed. The southern approach to the compound was more challenging than it had appeared from their observation post. The terrain was rocky and uneven, requiring careful navigation to avoid creating noise that might alert the defenders. Sarah navigated the obstacles with the kind of expertise that only came from years of experience in similar environments. When they reached the perimeter of the compound, Sarah's tactical instincts proved accurate. The defensive coverage on the southern side was indeed lighter than it appeared, designed more to channel attackers toward predetermined kill zones than to actually prevent infiltration by a skilled team. Rodriguez watched as Sarah identified and neutralized the electronic sensors that would have revealed their presence to the instructors monitoring the exercise. Her techniques were more sophisticated than anything he had learned in training, incorporating methods that suggested she had encountered similar security measures in real operational environments. As they moved deeper into the compound, Rodriguez realized that he was receiving a masterclass in advanced infiltration techniques from someone who had refined these skills through decades of practice in environments where failure could have fatal consequences. The exercise was becoming far more educational than he had expected, though not in the way he had originally anticipated. The central building that contained their intelligence objective was guarded by two instructors playing the role of enemy sentries. Sarah studied their patterns for several minutes before devising an approach that would allow them to bypass the guards without triggering the electronic detection systems that would signal their presence to the exercise controllers. "Master Chief," Sarah whispered, "in 30 seconds, the guard on the left is going to turn to check the entrance behind him. That gives us a 12-second window to cross the open space and reach the building. The timing has to be perfect, but if we execute properly, we can complete the mission without either guard knowing we were ever here." Rodriguez felt his heart rate increase as he prepared for the final phase of the infiltration. This was exactly the kind of high-pressure situation that separated elite soldiers from average ones, the moment when all training and preparation came together in a few seconds of flawless execution. The seconds stretched like hours as Rodriguez waited for Sarah's signal. Everything she had predicted about the guard's movement pattern proved accurate. Exactly 12 seconds after she had spoken, the sentry turned to check the entrance behind him. Sarah moved like a shadow across the open ground, her decades of experience evident in every silent step. Rodriguez followed, matching her movements with the precision of someone who understood that their success depended on perfect synchronization. They reached the target building without triggering any alarms, and Sarah immediately began working on the electronic lock system that protected the intelligence they needed to retrieve. Rodriguez watched in amazement as she bypassed security measures with techniques that clearly went far beyond standard military training. Her fingers moved across the control panel with the confidence of someone who had encountered similar systems in real operational environments. "Where did you learn to do that?" Rodriguez whispered, his voice filled with professional curiosity. Sarah glanced at him with a slight smile. "Some skills you pick up along the way when your missions require you to operate in places where the standard approaches don't work. Let's just say that humanitarian operations sometimes require creative interpretations of access protocols." Within minutes, she had gained entry to the building and located the intelligence materials that represented their mission objective. But, as they prepared to extract, Sarah suddenly froze, her expression becoming intensely focused as she listened to something only she could hear. Master Chief, she whispered urgently, we have a problem. I can hear radio chatter from the exercise controllers. They're about to change the scenario parameters. In about 2 minutes, this entire compound is going to be flooded with additional defenders, and all the exit routes we planned are going to be compromised. Rodriguez felt a surge of adrenaline as he processed this information. The ability to gather intelligence from ambient sounds and interpret its tactical significance was a skill that went far beyond anything he had learned in training. Sarah's warning meant they needed to abort their careful extraction plan and improvise something entirely new in less than 2 minutes. What do you recommend? Rodriguez asked, trusting her assessment completely. Sarah was already moving toward a window that overlooked a section of the compound they hadn't previously considered. We go up instead of out. The roof access will give us an elevated position to observe the new defensive pattern, and we can time our extraction to coincide with whatever chaos the scenario change creates. It was a bold decision that required immediate action. Rodriguez followed Sarah as she led him through the building toward a maintenance stairway that provided access to the roof. Her navigation of the unfamiliar structure was flawless, suggesting an ability to quickly assess architectural layouts that came from years of operating in hostile environments. As they reached the roof, the compound below began to transform exactly as Sarah had predicted. Additional defenders emerged from concealed positions, creating a security net that would have captured them if they had attempted to extract using their original route. Rodriguez realized that Sarah's ability to gather and interpret intelligence from subtle environmental cues had just saved their mission from certain failure. From their elevated position, they could observe the entire exercise area and see how the other teams were responding to the sudden change in scenario parameters. Most teams were struggling to adapt to the new defensive arrangements, their original plans rendered obsolete by circumstances they hadn't anticipated. This is why experience matters, Sarah said quietly as they watched Team Bravo stumble into a trap that had been invisible from ground level but was obvious from their elevated perspective. You can teach tactics and techniques in training, but the ability to read a situation and adapt to changing circumstances comes from having faced similar challenges before. Meanwhile, Thompson and Williams were executing their diversion perfectly, drawing attention away from the central compound and creating confusion among the defenders. Their performance demonstrated the value of having teammates who understood their roles within a larger strategic framework, even when that framework had to be modified in real time. Rodriguez found himself learning lessons that went far beyond the official objectives of the training exercise. Watching Sarah operate under pressure was like receiving a masterclass in advanced tactical thinking from someone who had refined these skills through decades of real-world application. As the exercise continued to evolve, Sarah identified an extraction opportunity that would allow them to complete their mission without detection. Her plan required precise timing and perfect execution, but it offered the possibility of achieving mission success while demonstrating tactical sophistication that would impress the instructors. Master Chief, Sarah said, in about 3 minutes, the defenders are going to be distracted by the response to Thompson and Williams' diversion. That's our window to move. But we need to extract through the vehicle maintenance area, not the perimeter routes we originally planned. Rodriguez nodded, trusting her assessment completely. The fact that she could predict the flow of the exercise with such accuracy spoke to a level of tactical understanding that he was only beginning to appreciate. Their extraction went exactly as Sarah had predicted. They moved through the compound like ghosts, avoiding detection while other teams struggled with the modified scenario parameters. When they reached the extraction point, they had successfully completed their mission objectives while gathering additional intelligence that exceeded the exercise requirements. As the exercise concluded, Colonel Harrison gathered all the teams for a debriefing session that would analyze performance and identify lessons learned. When he called Team Alpha forward to present their results, there was a murmur of surprise from the other participants. Team Alpha had not only completed their primary mission objectives, but had also demonstrated tactical innovations that exceeded the instructors' expectations. Team Alpha, Colonel Harrison announced, achieved complete mission success with 0 casualties and 0 detection events. Their tactical approach demonstrated advanced planning, excellent adaptation to changing circumstances, and superior execution under pressure. Rodriguez stepped forward to present the team's results, but he made sure to acknowledge the contribution that had made their success possible. Sir, our performance was significantly enhanced by the expertise of Petty Officer Martinez, whose experience and tactical insights enabled us to develop and execute an approach that exceeded our original mission parameters. The recognition was important, but, for Sarah, the real satisfaction came from seeing how her teammates had grown during the exercise. Thompson had demonstrated courage and initiative that went beyond his years of experience. Williams had shown the kind of analytical thinking that marked future leaders. Rodriguez had proven his ability to adapt his leadership style to leverage the strengths of his team members. After the formal debriefing, the participants gathered for the traditional informal discussions that allowed teams to share experiences and learn from each other's approaches. The conversation naturally turned to the question that had started everything: Sarah's combat experience and how it had influenced their mission success. Martinez called out a SEAL from Team Bravo. "We heard about your service record. 30 years covering pretty much every conflict since the Gulf War." Sarah nodded, recognizing that her background had become the subject of discussion among all the participants. "That's accurate. I've been fortunate to serve in a variety of capacities over the years." Another participant asked, "What's the most important thing you've learned that could help the rest of us?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "The most important thing I've learned is that every mission teaches you something new, regardless of how much experience you have. Today, working with Team Alpha, I learned that the next generation of special operations personnel is incredibly capable and adaptable." Master Chief Rodriguez demonstrated leadership skills that allowed him to leverage every team member's strengths. Thompson and Williams showed the kind of courage and professionalism that makes me confident about the future of our military. She paused, looking around at the assembled group of elite soldiers. "But if I had to give you one piece of practical advice, it would be this: never stop learning. Every person you serve with has something to teach you, regardless of their rank or experience level. Every mission provides opportunities to refine your skills and expand your understanding. And never assume that the way things have always been done is the only way they can be done." The gathering continued for another hour, with participants from different teams sharing their experiences and discussing tactical approaches. Sarah found herself answering questions about various conflicts and sharing insights that helped younger soldiers understand the broader context of their service. As the day wound down and participants began preparing for their return to their home units, Rodriguez approached Sarah for a private conversation. "Martinez, I want to thank you for what you contributed today. But I also want to ask, with your level of experience, why are you still serving? Most people with your background would have retired years ago to civilian careers." Sarah looked out across the training compound, where she had spent the day working with some of the finest soldiers in the American military. "Master Chief, I serve because this is where I can make the most difference. Every young soldier I work with represents the future of our military. Every mission I participate in is an opportunity to share knowledge that might save lives or accomplish objectives that matter." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "I've seen enough war to know its costs, but I've also seen enough of the world to know that sometimes military force is the only thing standing between innocent people and those who would harm them. As long as I can contribute to that mission, I'll keep serving." Rodriguez understood that he had been privileged to work with someone whose dedication to service went far beyond personal ambition or career advancement. Sarah's commitment was to something larger than herself, a recognition that her experience and skills represented a resource that belonged to the military community and the country they all served. As Team Alpha prepared to separate and return to their regular duties, each member carried with them lessons that would influence their military careers for years to come. They had learned that experience comes in many forms, that assumptions about capability can be misleading, and that the most valuable team members are often those who contribute through expertise rather than ego. For Sarah, the training exercise had been another day in a career that had spanned 3 decades and countless missions. But it had also been a reminder that service is about more than individual achievement. It's about passing along knowledge, supporting teammates, and continuing to grow regardless of how much you've already accomplished. The joke that had started the day, Master Chief Rodriguez asking which war she had served in had become a gateway to understanding that military service is a continuum that connects generations of warriors. Sarah's response hadn't silenced the camp out of intimidation or discomfort, but out of recognition that they were in the presence of someone who embodied the very best traditions of American military service. As the participants departed, each carrying memories of a training exercise that had exceeded all expectations, they understood that they had experienced something special. They had worked alongside someone who represented a living link to decades of military history, and they had learned that true expertise is characterized not by the need to dominate others, but by the wisdom to know when to lead and when to teach. The story of Sarah Martinez would be told and retold in military circles for years to come, not as a tale of someone trying to prove her superiority, but as an example of how experience, humility, and dedication to service could transform a routine training exercise into a masterclass in military excellence.